We're your trusted partners right by your side.
Evergreen Implement.
For all your farming needs, we're your go-to guy.
Evergreen Implement.
Something else on here to look at and adjust every year. We have our tread adjust, which is a hydraulic tread adjust, or that's an option for the hydraulic tread adjust. You do have a manual where you have to physically jack it up, slide them out, and repin them. But the ones with hydraulic tread adjust, there's some shims up here that they need to be adjusted occasionally. That way they don't get too sloppy. If they get too sloppy, then the end of your axle is able to flop around and stuff. So we don't want that happening. But with that tread adjust, the more you use it, the more likely it is to keep functioning for you. If you run it out and you have it in the wide position, go spray for a couple weeks and never get around to moving it in, and you go to move it in after that time, it may have rusted up just from the chemical being right there. When you're running the tread adjust, you need to be moving, and as you're driving along, you're able to go in or out with them, depending on which one you have. If you have the 49, 30, or 40, then they do have it to where you can have different presets to where you can run them, and then it will run out to those stops instead of you having to look at the indicator up on the front or back to see where you're at. So you could adjust those independently. But with those tread adjust shims, some people do like to lube them. Paul, do you remember what Deere's recommending?
Super lube.
Super lube on them? Okay. So the more you could keep them lubed or operational, the better off you are. If you do need to go adjust them, one thing we found is some sprayers that we've gotten in the past, it looked like people had ran the booms or flushed the booms when they're folded up, something people would commonly do because you don't have room to necessarily unfold them out in the shop to finish flushing them to clean them. But the problem with that is when they do that, the side of the sprayer is covered with rust because of all the chemicals being dropped on it and not rinsing off afterwards. And that will come down onto these tread adjust bolts and just rust those up, and then Paul gets lots of experience. Customers can do it, but most guys, by the time they find out what all is involved with getting all those broke loose and drilled out, we've gone out and had to work on those quite a bit. So keep them working, operational, moving. There are cylinders down inside these housings here. We have had some of those lines blow on there, so if tread adjust doesn't work, hop out and look and make sure we didn't blow a line. 4700s, and I think even the 20s, they didn't work quite as freely. So we did see more times where you'd have to go drive them and maybe turn in a circle to where it's helped pulling it out, or turn into the circle to help push it in, whichever way it was. So just a couple different things with those. Other things as we're right here are suspension. Our airbag suspension on these, it is self-leveling, and it has an onboard air compressor, so it's going to set the height. But we do need to watch and make sure none of the bushings fall out. We have had some of these bushings out here fall out to where one of the arms pops off, and then it just flops there, and then this is a dead spring. And so you have that happen, or the air lines have popped off at different times or broken. Normally I'd say the air lines are broken after we've hauled it on a truck because of where the truck drivers have thrown the chains. Just out running, I haven't broken any air lines. So just be aware of that. Look at that. If you have the 4700 or one without the automatic air suspension on it, then you have to go through and get it half full of water and measure what your travel is on your on the chrome part of the barrel, and that's how you're going to end up setting your suspension on there. So the lighter you get, the more suspension you have because it's not compressing it. So that's a nice thing with the automatic part. It's always adjusting that. Also look at your shims that you have up here. Through time, this wheel will start wiggling and shimming around, and it will start to break those bushings out, and then the pin that goes through there, hammer that out. So if it's getting really sloppy, you might have to go in and reshim that. It's a lot easier to repair that and adjust it before it's completely gone. So look for that. The other thing out here on our wheels, check your wheel hardware. It really shouldn't come loose, but they do come loose after time. And they may run for 3 years, then all of a sudden they're loose. So just occasionally check that. If you ever walk by it and you see an extra little rust spot around its outer edge, it's probably sitting there working and you just don't know it. So these wheels are quite spendy. They're proud of them, and they don't just have them laying around everywhere. So just watch that and keep track of it. Another thing, as far as servicing goes, these power hubs, originally they want us to change those after the first 50 hours. And if you took that off after 50 hours of running it, when they're brand new, and you looked at it and you saw the oil in there, you'd be calling us up saying you need 4 hubs warranted because they're shot. There's so much metal and junk in there, you're sure they are. Well, I'll tell you, if you drain it, then you fill it back up with clean oil and go run again, you won't be feeling that way. It is a casting in there, fairly crude casting, and that's just how much junk we see out of the initial 50-hour break-in. So watch that. They are running synthetic oil in there, so we want to make sure we get the right oil back in there. We are running that for cooling problems. These newer sprayers, we have bigger hubs than we've had in the past, so we haven't had the problems. But like the 4700s, those hubs were undersized to begin with once we put them out in the hills, and so we had more problems with those.
Jim, what are you doing on the oil on the hubs? You just by the book, or are you doing it at a different rate on the changing the oil in those?
For no more than that oil cost, and to prevent any major problem, I'd be happy if people would change them once a year.
It's about one I think is 4 gallons or 4
Okay.
to 5 gallons.
Okay, and they did change the fill level on it. Paul, do you remember what it was we found on the 4830s?
I don't remember.
Okay, when they're changing
They
it,
actually lowered the level, if I remember.
yeah, they dropped it like a quart. And I don't know what year they did, if it was only the first year of the 4830s, the operator's manual was different. So if you have questions on that, we'll have to look it up for you and tell you exactly what it is, because they did change that because of heating issues. So they're too full and building up extra pressure. Kind of last thing for the beginning of year to check is software updates. In fact, here today we're running several updates on these because things have changed here in the last little bit. They have updates at least twice a year, and if you're running Apex, they may have Apex updates 4 times a year. And what you can run into is you don't update Apex, but you update your display, you're going to be able to run. But if you update Apex and you don't update your display, the display will not take that new software from Apex. You'll be forced to run that, or you'll have to have it write the Apex to the previous version of software, which you do on Apex. So then you're stuck out in the field wishing you had all your updates, because the receiver update this spring is about 30 minutes. So you're sitting there. You could drive the sprayer to the field, but you're not going to do anything in the field because it does communicate with all the controllers. Any other thoughts you guys have, things you'd like to see done before the beginning of the year when you go out?
Wish you guys would have washed mine.
If I remember right, it was snowing when we had it last. Okay. Well, I guess we'll move on to another spot. You guys need a break for a little bit? Tired of listening to me? What's that? Okay. Well,